Cowboy finds wild horses, but one rare stallion obeys only after Obese Noblewoman's secret. Hey there folks. Before we dive into this incredible tale from the Old West, I'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying these stories, please hit that like button and drop a comment below. Your support means the world to me. The desert heat shimmered like liquid glass across the Arizona Badlands as Jake Thornton pulled his mare to a stop. Dust caked his weathered face, and his throat felt like sandpaper. 3 days of tracking had led him here, to Devil's Canyon, where even the Apache feared to tread. His water was running low, but the promise of wild horses kept him moving forward. The year was 1873, and at 32, Jake had broken more horses than any man in the territory. But what he saw next made his blood run cold. Through the dancing heat waves, a sight emerged that defied belief. A herd of Mustangs, perhaps 40 strong, moved like phantoms across the canyon floor. But it wasn't the herd that stole his breath. At its head ran a stallion unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. Coal-black with a lightning bolt of white blazing down its face, the horse moved with an otherworldly grace. Its mane flowed like midnight silk, and its eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. The other horses followed it with absolute devotion, as if it were their king. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for his field glasses. Through the lenses, he could see the stallion's powerful muscles rippling beneath its glossy coat. This was no ordinary Mustang. This was the horse his grandfather had spoken of in hushed whispers. The Ghost King, they called it. Legend said it could never be tamed, that it possessed the spirit of an ancient Apache warrior. Men had died trying to capture it, but Jake had something they didn't. A secret passed down through 3 generations of horsebreakers. As he watched, the stallion suddenly stopped and turned its head directly toward him. Even from half a mile away, Jake felt those dark eyes boring into his soul. The horse reared up on its hind legs, releasing a challenging scream that echoed off the canyon walls. The sound sent shivers down Jake's spine. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the entire herd vanished into a narrow ravine, leaving only dust devils dancing in their wake. Jake knew he should turn back. His supplies were dangerously low, and Devil's Canyon had claimed more than its share of foolish men. But the image of that magnificent stallion burned in his mind like a brand. He thought of his failing ranch, of the debts piling up since the drought began. One horse like that could save everything. More than that, something deep in his chest called out to the wild spirit he'd glimpsed. He kicked his mare forward, following the herd into the unknown. Behind him, storm clouds began gathering on the horizon, dark and ominous. He never noticed the fresh graves hidden among the rocks, marked only by broken lassos and empty saddles. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something else, something ancient and wild, that made his mare dance nervously beneath him. But Jake pressed on, drawn by a force he couldn't name. The storm hit just after sunset, turning Devil's Canyon into a raging torrent of mud and debris. Jake huddled beneath an overhang, his mare pressed close against the rock face. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the canyon in stark, terrifying flashes. In those brief moments of light, he caught glimpses of the Mustang herd, standing calmly in the deluge, as if the storm were nothing more than a gentle rain. The Ghost King stood apart, watching, always watching. Its dark form seemed to absorb the lightning, making it appear like a living shadow against the tempest. When dawn finally broke, Jake emerged to find the landscape transformed. Flash floods had carved new channels through the canyon floor, and his planned route was now impassable. But there, clear as day, in the fresh mud, were hoofprints leading up a narrow trail he hadn't noticed before. The prints were enormous, clearly belonging to the black stallion. It was almost as if the horse were leading him somewhere. Against his better judgment, Jake decided to follow. The trail wound higher into the canyon walls. Becoming increasingly treacherous, Jake had to dismount and lead his mare by hand across sections where the path narrowed to barely 2 feet wide. One misstep would mean a 100-foot fall onto jagged rocks below. Sweat poured down his face despite the morning chill. His mare whinnied nervously, her shoes slipping on the whetstone. Then he heard it, the sound of horses nickering somewhere above. He quickened his pace, excitement overcoming caution. The trail opened onto a hidden valley that took Jake's breath away. A natural spring fed a crystal-clear pool, surrounded by sweet grass that grew thick and green despite the desert climate. The Mustang herd grazed peacefully, foals playing near their mothers. And there, drinking from the pool, stood the Ghost King. Up close, the stallion was even more magnificent. Scars crisscrossed its chest and flanks, testament to battles won. Jake estimated it stood at least 17 hands high, massive for a Mustang. Its coat gleamed like polished obsidian, and when it moved, muscles rippled with a power that spoke of countless years running free. Slowly, carefully, Jake reached for the rope coiled at his saddle. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. The secret isn't in breaking their body, boy. It's in touching their soul. But as his hand closed around the lasso, the stallion's head snapped up. Those intelligent eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Jake freeze. The horse didn't run. Instead, it walked toward him with deliberate steps, each hoof fall echoing like thunder. Jake's mare whinnied nervously and backed away. When the Ghost King was barely 10 feet away, it stopped and pawed the ground 3 times. A challenge. Then it turned and galloped toward the far end of the valley, where another narrow passage led deeper into the canyon system. The message was clear: follow if you dare. Jake's hands shook as he mounted his mare. Whatever game this horse was playing, he was already too deep to turn back now. The other Mustangs watched him pass with knowing eyes, as if they too were part of some ancient test he didn't yet understand. The passage led to a maze of interconnected canyons, each more confusing than the last. Jake tried to mark his path, but the constant wind erased any signs he left. By noon, he was hopelessly lost. His water was down to the last canteen, and his mare stumbled with exhaustion. The Mustang herd had vanished again, leaving him alone, in a natural labyrinth. Panic began to creep in as the sun beat down mercilessly from above. The red rock walls seemed to close in, and Jake realized he might die here. Another fool who'd chased a legend too far. Just when despair threatened to overwhelm him, Jake heard the sound of human voices. He urged his tired mare toward the sound, rounding a massive boulder to find an unexpected sight. A grand carriage, completely out of place in this wilderness, sat tilted at an angle with a broken wheel. Beside it, 2 men in fancy uniforms struggled with makeshift repairs, while a woman's voice barked orders from within the carriage. The men looked up at Jake's approach, relief flooding their faces. "Thank the Lord," one of them exclaimed in a thick European accent. "We've been stranded here since yesterday. Our guide abandoned us when he saw the storm coming." Jake dismounted, assessing the situation. The carriage was far too heavy for this terrain, clearly belonging to someone of great wealth who had no business being in Devil's Canyon. It was painted deep purple with gold trim, more suited to European capitals than American wilderness. "Who's in there?" he asked, gesturing toward the carriage. The men exchanged nervous glances before one answered. "The Countess Margareta von Habsburg, from Austria. She's here on a special mission." Before Jake could respond, the carriage door flew open. What emerged defied his expectations entirely. The Countess was enormous, requiring both servants' assistance to descend the carriage steps. She must have weighed over 300 pounds, dressed in elaborate riding clothes that seemed designed more for a European fox hunt than the American desert. But her eyes were sharp and intelligent, studying Jake with the same intensity he'd seen in the Ghost King's gaze. Despite her size, she moved with surprising grace, and her presence commanded immediate attention. "You're tracking the Black Stallion," she stated. It wasn't a question. Jake's hand instinctively moved to his gun. "How do you know about that?" The Countess smiled, a knowing expression that made him uneasy. "My dear boy, I've traveled halfway around the world for that horse. My family has been searching for it for 3 generations. You see, that stallion carries a bloodline that goes back to the war horses of Charlemagne himself. It was stolen from our stables 70 years ago by a Native American shaman who did something to it. Something that made it immortal." Jake nearly laughed at the absurdity, but something in her expression stopped him. She was deadly serious, and her servants nodded along as if this were common knowledge. "Lady, I don't know what fairy tales you've been told." But she held up a hand, silencing him with an imperious gesture. "I can prove it. But first, you must help us repair this wheel. Then I'll show you something that will change everything you think you know about that horse. And more importantly, I'll tell you the only way it can be tamed. Because all your ropes and tricks won't work on a creature that has lived for nearly a century and learned every trick men can devise." Despite his skepticism, Jake found himself agreeing. He was lost anyway, and these people clearly needed help. As he worked on the wheel, alongside the servants, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Ghost King was somewhere nearby, watching and waiting. The game was far from over, and now it had taken an unexpected turn with this strange foreign woman and her impossible claims. By sunset, they had the carriage wheel repaired. The Countess insisted Jake join them for dinner, producing an elaborate meal from seemingly nowhere. As they ate by firelight, she began her tale. In 1803, my great-grandfather owned the finest stud farm in Austria. His prized possession was a black stallion named Midnight Emperor, descended from the personal warhorse of Charlemagne. The horse was magnificent, but also wild-spirited. Only one man could ride him, a Shoshone warrior named White Eagle whom my great-grandfather had acquired as a slave. Her voice carried shame at the word, suggesting she understood the evil of her ancestors' actions. Jake's jaw tightened at the word slave, but he remained silent as she continued. White Eagle loved that horse more than life itself. They were like one being when they rode together. When my great-grandfather decided to sell Midnight Emperor to the Russian Tsar, White Eagle stole him and fled. The chase lasted months, across ocean and continent. My great-grandfather hired the best trackers, offered fortunes in reward money. Finally, cornered in these very canyons, White Eagle performed a ceremony. He bound his spirit to the horse, making them both immortal until someone could prove themselves worthy of the bond. She paused, studying Jake's skeptical expression. You don't believe me? Very well. The Countess reached into her traveling case and produced a leather journal, its pages yellow with age. Inside were detailed drawings of a horse identical to the Ghost King, down to the lightning bolt marking, but the dates on the pages were from 1803. This was drawn by my great-grandfather. Now look at this. She showed him a photograph from 1851, then another from 1869. The same horse, unchanged by time. The same intelligent eyes, the same proud bearing. She had newspaper clippings too, reports of sightings across decades, always describing the same unmistakable stallion. Jake's rational mind rebelled, but the evidence was unsettling. Even if I believed this, Jake said slowly, what makes you think you can tame it when no one else has? The Countess smiled, her multiple chins wobbling. Because I know the secret. White Eagle used the ceremony didn't just bind their spirits, it created a test. The horse can only be tamed by someone who understands the true meaning of freedom, someone who would choose to let it go rather than break its spirit. My family never understood this. They kept trying to dominate it, to own it. But you, she leaned forward, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. You're different. I saw how you watched it. You don't want to own it. You want to understand it. Jake stood abruptly, uncomfortable with her penetrating gaze. Lady, I need that horse to save my ranch. That's all. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. The Countess chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. Tomorrow, I'll show you where it goes to drink at dawn. There's a box canyon with only one entrance. You could trap it there easily. But remember what I've told you. The usual ways won't work. You must be willing to lose everything to gain everything. She pulled out another item, a map, hand-drawn and ancient. This shows all the Ghost King's favorite places in these canyons. My family has been tracking it for 70 years. Use this knowledge wisely. As Jake bedded down for the night, her words echoed in his mind. Above, stars wheeled in the desert sky, and somewhere in the darkness, he heard the Ghost King's challenging call. Tomorrow, everything would change. He could feel it in his bones, the way he could feel storms coming across the plains. The game between man and horse was about to reach its crucial moment. What he didn't know was that the Countess had her own secrets, her own reasons for helping him. In her tent, she studied another photograph, one she hadn't shown Jake. It was of White Eagle himself, and the resemblance to Jake was unmistakable. Some games, she knew, were played across generations. Blood called to blood. And perhaps it was no accident that Jake Thornton had been drawn to Devil's Canyon at this precise moment in time. Dawn came like a whisper across the canyon walls. Jake crept forward on foot, having left his mare with the Countess's camp. True to her word, there was the Ghost King, drinking from a small spring in a box canyon. The only entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for two horses to pass through side by side. Jake had strung rope across it in the darkness, creating a barrier that would trap the stallion inside. His heart hammered as he watched the magnificent animal, alone for once, without its herd. The morning light caught its coat, making it shine like black silk, and the white lightning bolt seemed to glow with its own inner light. The Ghost King raised its head, water dripping from its muzzle, and looked directly at where Jake hid. For a moment, neither moved. Then the stallion did something unexpected. It nickered softly, almost like a greeting. Not the challenging scream from before, but something almost welcoming. Jake emerged from his hiding spot, rope in hand. Easy boy, he whispered, though he knew the horse could escape at any moment if it chose to charge the barrier. I don't want to hurt you, But I need you to understand something. Men are going to keep coming for you. If not me, then others. And they won't all be as careful. The stallion's ears flicked forward, as if listening. Jake took a step closer, then another. He was within roping distance now. The Ghost King stood perfectly still, watching him with those unsettling eyes. In them, Jake saw something that made his breath catch. Not just intelligence, but memory. Decades of memory. How many men had tried this before? How many ropes had this horse dodged? Jake's hand trembled on the lasso. Everything he'd ever learned about horsebreaking told him this was the moment. Throw the rope, establish dominance, begin the process. But the Countess's words echoed in his mind. What if she was right? What if the usual ways wouldn't work? What if this required something else entirely? Instead of throwing the rope, Jake did something that went against every instinct. He dropped it on the ground and spread his empty hands. I know what you are, he said softly. Or at least, I think I do. White Eagle bound himself to you, didn't he? You're waiting for something, someone. Maybe I'm not that person, but I'm tired of the games. He took another step forward. The Ghost King snorted, but didn't retreat. They were barely 6 feet apart now. Jake could see old scars on the horse's chest, could smell the wild sage scent of its coat. This close, he could see that the stallion's eyes weren't black as he'd thought, but a deep brown with gold flecks, like looking into an ancient forest. Here's what I propose, Jake continued, feeling slightly insane for negotiating with a horse. You come with me willingly, and I promise you'll never wear hobbles. Never be beaten. Never be sold. You'll help me save my ranch, and in return, I'll make sure you and your herd have protected grazing lands. Partners, not master and slave. The Ghost King's head tilted slightly, and for a moment, Jake could have sworn he saw amusement in those ancient eyes. Then the stallion moved, but not to flee. It stepped forward until its massive head was inches from Jake's chest. Hot breath washed over him. This close, he could see that the lightning bolt marking on its face seemed to pulse with its heartbeat. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, Jake raised his hand. His fingers were inches from the stallion's face when everything went wrong. A shot rang out, shattering the morning silence. The Ghost King reared back with a scream of rage as blood appeared on its shoulder. Jake spun to see armed men flooding into the canyon, bounty hunters who'd been tracking the horse. The Countess's warning had been a trap. She'd led them all here. As bullets flew and the Ghost King charged toward the barrier, Jake made a decision that would haunt him. He grabbed his knife and slashed the ropes, blocking the exit. Run, he shouted. The stallion needed no encouragement, bursting through the opening like black lightning. But as it passed Jake, it bumped him hard with its uninjured shoulder. Not an attack, but almost like acknowledgement. Then it was gone, vanishing into the canyon maze. The bounty hunters cursed and gave chase, leaving Jake alone with his shame and fury. He'd been played for a fool. But that bump from the Ghost King, that had meant something. He was sure of it. Jake stormed back to the Countess's camp, rage burning in his chest. But the camp was empty. The carriage, the servants, even the signs of their presence, all gone, as if they'd never existed. Only a single piece of paper remained, weighted down by a rock. Jake snatched it up, reading the flowing script. My dear Mr. Thornton, forgive the deception, but I needed to test your character. The bounty hunters were hired by me, yes, but not to capture the horse. They were firing blanks. I needed to see what you would do when forced to choose between your own interests and the stallion's freedom. You passed. Jake's hands shook as he read, anger mixing with confusion, that the letter continued. The Ghost King will return to you, but only when you truly understand what White Eagle knew. The horse doesn't need to be tamed. It needs to be partnered. Your grandfather knew this. He tried to tell your father, but the message was lost. Look in your family's old trunk, the one you've never opened. The answer has been with you all along. When you understand, return to Devil's Canyon. The horse will be waiting. It was signed simply, M, who was never who I claimed to be. P.S. The wound was superficial. The stallion has endured far worse, and healed from all of it. Time, Mr. Thornton, means nothing to him. But the right partnership means everything. Confused and exhausted, Jake began the long journey home. It took him 3 days to find his way out of the canyon system, his mare barely surviving the ordeal. When he finally reached his ranch, he found it in worse shape than when he'd left. The bank notice was posted on his door. 30 days to pay or lose everything. His few remaining cattle looked gaunt, and the well was running dangerously low. The Ghost King had been his last hope, and he'd let it slip away. But something had changed in him during those days in Devil's Canyon. The usual desperation was replaced by a strange certainty that this wasn't over. That night, by lamplight, Jake dragged out his grandfather's old trunk from the barn. He'd always meant to go through it, but never had the time. Inside, beneath yellowed photographs and moldy clothes, he found a leather journal similar to the one the Countess had shown him, but this one was written in his grandfather's hand. As he read, his blood ran cold. His grandfather had known White Eagle. More than that, they had been friends, brothers in all but blood. The entries detailed their adventures together, their shared love of horses, and finally, the tragedy that separated them. Page after page revealed a friendship that transcended the racial hatred of the time. Two men who saw each other as equals in a world that insisted they couldn't be. The journal told of how White Eagle had come to America as a young warrior, captured and sold, but how Jake's grandfather had bought his freedom and offered him partnership instead of servitude. Together, they had built a reputation as the finest horse trainers in the territory. The Ghost King, then called Midnight Emperor, had been White Eagle's special project, a horse unlike any other. When men came to steal it, claiming prior ownership, from across the ocean, White Eagle had fled to protect the stallion. Jake's grandfather had helped, providing supplies and false trails to throw off pursuers. The final entry made Jake's hands shake. White Eagle came to me before he died, ancient beyond measure, but finally ready to rest. He told me the stallion would live on, waiting for one of my blood who could see horses as he did, not as beasts to be broken, but as spirits to be joined. He gave me something, said to pass it down until the right descendant came along. I failed with my son. He was too hard, too focused on dominance. But perhaps someday. The item is hidden beneath the false bottom of this trunk. May the right Thornton find it when the time comes. Jake's fingers searched frantically until they found the hidden compartment. Inside was a small leather pouch containing a carved stone horse, so detailed it seemed almost alive. The moment Jake touched it, images flooded his mind. White Eagle and the Ghost King riding as one. Not through dominance, but through perfect understanding. He saw the ceremony, understood its true purpose. It wasn't about binding the horse to servitude, but about creating a test that would last until someone worthy could prove that the old ways of partnership could live again. The stone grew warm in his hand, and Jake knew with absolute certainty that he had to return to Devil's Canyon. The Ghost King would be waiting, and this time, Jake would approach not as a man trying to capture a horse, but as someone offering to renew an ancient bond of trust. The real challenge was whether he could live up to the legacy White Eagle and his grandfather had left behind. Jake returned to Devil's Canyon at dawn 3 days later, the carved stone horse warm in his shirt pocket. This time, he came alone, without ropes or weapons, carrying only water and the weight of understanding. The canyon looked different now, not like a maze to trap the unwary, but like a sacred place that had witnessed something profound. As he entered the narrow defile, he felt the stone pulse against his chest, growing warmer with each step. The Ghost King was near. He found the stallion at the hidden spring, exactly where he'd first attempted to capture it. But this time, the entire herd was there, spread across the valley like a living tapestry. Mares grazed while foals played, and the Ghost King stood sentinel on a small rise, watching Jake's approach. The morning sun caught the stallion's coat, making it gleam like polished obsidian. Jake stopped at the valley's edge and slowly pulled out the carved stone horse. The moment it caught the light, the Ghost King's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. I understand now, Jake called out, his voice carrying across the still morning air. This isn't about taming or breaking. White Eagle knew that. My grandfather knew it. They were partners, equals. That's what you've been waiting for, isn't it? Not someone to master you, but someone to ride alongside you as a brother. The Ghost King began walking toward him, each step measured and deliberate. The other horses watched in silence, as if witnessing something momentous. When the stallion was 20 feet away, Jake placed the stone horse on a flat rock and stepped back. White Eagle gave this to my grandfather, and my grandfather left it for me. But I think it belongs to you. It's not a symbol of ownership, it's a promise. A promise that the old ways haven't been forgotten. That there are still those who understand what it means to truly partner with a horse. The Ghost King approached the stone, lowering its massive head to sniff at the carved figure. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the stallion touched the stone with its muzzle, and Jake gasped as images flooded his mind. He saw White Eagle as a young man, proud and free on the plains, riding horses that seemed to fly across the grasslands. He saw the capture, the chains, the journey to a strange land. But he also saw Jake's grandfather, Thomas Thornton, cutting those chains and offering his hand in friendship. He saw them working together, learning from each other, creating something new from the fusion of their different traditions. And he saw the moment White Eagle performed the binding ceremony. Not out of desperation, but out of hope. Hope that someday, someone would prove that the partnership between human and horse could transcend ownership and become something greater. Visions faded, and Jake found himself on his knees, tears streaming down his face. The Ghost King stood over him, so close Jake could feel the warmth radiating from its body. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, Jake raised his hand. This time, no shots rang out. This time, there were no tricks or traps. His palm touched the stallion's neck, and the connection was like lightning through his soul. Not possession, but recognition. Not dominance, but partnership. The Ghost King nickered softly, the sound like distant thunder, and Jake knew he had passed the test. But he also knew this was just the beginning. Standing, Jake looked into those ancient eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. "I won't take you from this place," he said. "This is your home, your family. But I have an idea, if you're willing to listen." The stallion's ears pricked forward, and Jake took that as encouragement. "There's going to be a race in Tucson, in 3 weeks. Winner takes $5,000, enough to save my ranch, and then some. But here's what I propose. We train together, here in your territory. You keep your freedom, and I learn your ways. We race as partners, not as master and slave. After that, you return here, and I'll use the winnings to buy this land, make it a protected sanctuary for your herd. What do you say?" The Ghost King turned and walked back toward the herd, then stopped and looked back at Jake. The message was clear. Jake grinned and followed, understanding that he had just entered into the most unusual partnership of his life. As he walked among the wild horses, accepted as one of them, he thought he heard White Eagle's spirit laughing on the wind. The ancient test had finally found its answer, not in domination, but in mutual respect and trust. For the first time, in 70 years, the Ghost King had found someone worthy of its partnership. The next 2 weeks transformed Jake's understanding of everything he thought he knew about horses. Each dawn, he arrived at the hidden valley, and each dawn, the Ghost King was waiting. But there were no saddles, no bridles, no traditional training methods. Instead, Jake learned to communicate through body language, through subtle shifts in weight and breathing, through a connection that went deeper than any equipment could create. The stallion taught him to ride as the ancient peoples had, not as a passenger, but as part of a single, unified being. At first, Jake could barely stay mounted for more than a few minutes. The Ghost King's power was overwhelming, its movements, too fluid and unpredictable for someone used to broken horses. But gradually, Jake began to understand the rhythm, the unspoken language between them. He learned that the stallion responded not to commands, but to intentions. Think left, and the horse would turn left. Think faster, and they would fly across the desert like the wind itself. It was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. And it humbled him to realize how crude his previous methods had been. The other horses accepted him now, the mares allowing him to walk among them without fear. Jake noticed things he'd never paid attention to before: the complex social structures, the way they communicated dangers, the protective circles they formed around the foals. The Ghost King, he realized, wasn't just their leader through strength, but through wisdom accumulated over decades. The stallion knew every water source, every safe path, every danger in a 100-mile radius. This knowledge, Jake understood, was what had kept the herd thriving in a land where most horses struggled to survive. One evening, as they rested by the spring, Jake finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "How long have you really lived?" The Ghost King turned those knowing eyes on him, and suddenly Jake was overwhelmed with images, decades flashing by like pages in a book. He saw the canyon when it was Apache territory, saw the first settlers arrive, saw his own grandfather. As a young man, the stallion had witnessed it all, unchanging while the world transformed around it. "My God," Jake whispered, "you really are immortal." But with that realization came another. The Ghost King was lonely. For 70 years, it had waited for someone who could truly understand, someone who could bridge the gap between the wild spirit of the horse and the world of men. White Eagle had been that bridge once, but his mortality had ended their partnership. Now, the stallion was offering Jake the same opportunity, but Jake understood it came with a price. This wasn't just about winning a race or saving a ranch. This was about preserving something sacred, something that the modern world was rapidly forgetting. As the race date approached, Jake made a decision. He wouldn't hide his training, or pretend the Ghost King was just another fast horse. He would tell the truth, or at least as much of it as people could accept. When he rode into Tucson, it would be as a representative of an older way. A reminder that the partnership between human and horse could be something more than domination and submission. The evening before they would leave for Tucson, Jake sat with the Ghost King as the sun set behind the canyon walls. "Whatever happens," he said, "I want you to know that these weeks have changed me. I came here looking to capture a horse to save my ranch. But I found something worth more than any prize money. I found a teacher, a partner, and maybe even a friend." The stallion nickered softly and rested its massive head on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of trust that would have been inconceivable weeks before. Tomorrow, they would face the outside world together. Tomorrow, they would show everyone what true partnership could achieve. But tonight, they were simply two souls who had found understanding across the divide of species, united by a bond that transcended words. The journey to Tucson tested their partnership in ways Jake hadn't anticipated. The Ghost King had never left Devil's Canyon in living memory, and the open desert made the stallion nervous. They traveled at night to avoid attention, Jake walking alongside rather than riding, letting the horse set the pace. By the second night, they found a rhythm. The Ghost King would scout ahead, while Jake followed, trusting the stallion's superior senses to guide them safely through the darkness. It was a reversal of the usual relationship, the horse leading and the human following. But it felt right. As they neared Tucson, Jake's anxiety grew. The race would draw every serious horseman in the territory, men who would recognize the Ghost King from legend, if not from personal attempts to capture it. He'd registered under a false name for the horse Desert Lightning, but he knew that wouldn't fool everyone. Still, the prize money could change everything. With $5,000, he could pay off the bank, fix up the ranch, and most importantly, buy the land around Devil's Canyon to protect the herd. The Ghost King seemed to understand the stakes, growing more focused and determined as they approached the town. They arrived at the outskirts of Tucson just before dawn on race day. Jake had arranged to stable the horse at a small ranch owned by an old friend, someone who could be trusted to keep quiet. But as they approached the barn, the Ghost King suddenly stopped, nostrils flaring. Jake heard it, two voices, and the metallic click of weapons being readied. His heart sank as armed men emerged from the shadows, led by a figure Jake recognized with a shock, the Countess, or whoever she really was. But now she wore practical riding clothes, and her enormous weight had vanished. It had been a disguise. "Hello, Mr. Thornton," she said, her accent now pure American. "I apologize for the continued deception, but I needed to be sure you were ready for the truth." She gestured to her men to lower their weapons. "My name is Margaret Preston. I'm White Eagle's granddaughter." Jake's world tilted. "That's impossible. White Eagle was Shoshone, and you're half Shoshone." "Actually," Margaret interrupted, "my mother was his daughter. My father a cavalry officer who fell in love despite all the reasons he shouldn't have. I've spent my life searching for the Ghost King, not to capture it, but to fulfill my grandfather's last wish." She pulled out a leather pouch similar to the one that had contained the stone horse. "He left me this, told me to give it to the stallion's chosen partner when the time came. But I had to test you first. Make sure you understood what my grandfather understood. The race today isn't just about money, Mr. Thornton. There are men here who plan to capture the Ghost King regardless of who wins. They've set traps, hired dozens of riders. They know the stallion will be exposed, vulnerable. I came to warn you and to offer my help." Jake's mind raced, processing this new information. "Why should I trust you? You've lied from the beginning." Margaret smiled sadly. "Because I'm the only one here who wants the same thing you do, to protect the Ghost King and preserve what it represents. My grandfather bound his spirit to that horse to save it from men who would destroy its wild soul. I've spent my inheritance and 20 years of my life making sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Look." She showed him documents, land deeds, legal papers. "I've already bought most of the land around Devil's Canyon. Win or lose today, the herd will be protected. But the Ghost King needs to race. Do you know why?" When Jake shook his head, she continued, "Because legends need to be seen to survive. If the Ghost King simply vanishes into the canyon, it becomes just another tall tale. But if people see it race, see what it's capable of, see the partnership you've achieved, then it becomes real. It becomes something worth protecting. My grandfather understood that. He made the horse immortal not just to save one animal, but to preserve an ideal. Today, you carry that ideal forward." Jake looked at the Ghost King, who had remained remarkably calm during this revelation. "What do you think, partner? Do we trust her?" The stallion stepped forward and sniffed Margaret's outstretched hand, then nickered softly. That was answer enough. "All right," Jake said. "But we do this my way. No saddle, no bridle. I ride as White Eagle, taught my grandfather, as the Ghost King taught me. Win or lose, we show them what real partnership looks like." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "My grandfather would be proud. Now, let's get you both ready. The race starts in 3 hours, and we have preparations to make. Those men who want to capture the Ghost King won't give up easily. But between your courage and my resources, we might just pull off a miracle." As the sun rose over Tucson, painting the sky in shades of fire, Jake realized that this race was about far more than saving his ranch. It was about proving that some things were worth more than money or ownership. That the bond between human and horse could transcend commerce and become something sacred. The Tucson Mile was the most prestigious horse race in the Arizona Territory, drawing spectators from hundreds of miles around. As Jake led the Ghost King toward the starting line, a hush fell over the crowd. Even without saddle or bridle, the stallion commanded attention. Its coat gleamed like black lightning, and it moved with a power that made the other horses look ordinary by comparison. Whispers rippled through the gathered horsemen. Some recognized the legendary Ghost King. Others simply marveled at the magnificent animal. Jake had expected hostility or disbelief at his unconventional approach. But instead, he saw something else in many faces. An old Apache man at the crowd's edge raised his hand in what might have been a salute. A young boy tugged at his father's sleeve, pointing excitedly. Even hardened gamblers fell silent as the Ghost King pranced past, its hooves barely seeming to touch the ground. Jake wore simple clothes, no fancy racing silks, just the worn leather and cotton of a working cowboy. The contrast with the other riders couldn't have been starker. At the starting line, Jake found himself next to Harrison Colt, the territory's most successful horse breeder and a man who'd reportedly spent fortune trying to capture the Ghost King. Colt's face was grim as he studied the stallion. "So it's true," he muttered. "You actually did it. You tamed the untamable." Jake shook his head. "I didn't tame anything. We're partners," Colt snorted derisively. "Partners? You young fools and your romantic notions. A horse's property, nothing more." But Jake noticed Colt's own mount shifting nervously, intimidated by the Ghost King's presence. The race official, a portly man named Judge Morrison, approached with clear reluctance. "Mr. Desert Lightning," he read from his paper, using Jake's false registration. "I'm obliged to inform you that racing without proper tack is against regulations. I'll have to disqualify you unless you properly equip your mount." Before Jake could respond, Margaret Preston appeared, now dressed as a wealthy lady of society. "Judge Morrison," she said sweetly, producing a leather folder. "I believe you'll find everything in order. Mr. Thornton is racing under traditional Native American rules, which are explicitly allowed under Territorial Statute 247, Section 3. She showed him official-looking documents that Jake suspected were freshly forged. The judge sputtered, but before he could object further, a commotion erupted at the crowd's edge. A group of hard-looking men pushed through, led by a scarred giant Jake, recognized as Bull McKenna, the most notorious horse thief in 3 territories. "That's the Ghost King," McKenna shouted. "There's a standing bounty of $3,000 on that horse, and I aim to collect." His men spread out, clearly planning to grab the stallion after the race, or during it. Jake tensed, but the Ghost King remained calm, almost amused. "Gentlemen," Margaret announced loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "I represent the White Eagle Foundation, dedicated to preserving the wild horse heritage of the American West. Any attempt to capture this horse will be met with legal action, and a personal bounty of $10,000 on the perpetrator's head." She smiled sweetly at McKenna. "Dead or alive, of course." The threat, delivered in such a pleasant tone, sent a chill through the crowd. McKenna's men looked suddenly uncertain. $10,000 was more than most would see in a lifetime. The starting pistol was raised, and Jake leaned forward, whispering to the Ghost King, "This is it, partner. Not for the money, not for the ranch, but to show them what we are together." The stallion's muscles bunched beneath him, power coiled like a spring. Around them, other riders fought to control their mounts, all of which seemed agitated by the Ghost King's presence. Jake felt the carved stone horse warm against his chest, where he'd placed it, in a small pouch, a reminder of the legacy they carried. The official began the countdown. "Riders ready. Set. The Ghost King pawed the ground once, twice, its entire body vibrating with contained energy. Jake felt their minds merge, human thought and equine instinct becoming one. Time seemed to slow. He saw McKenna's men positioning themselves along the race route. Saw Colt's rider preparing to box them in at the start. Saw 1,000 small details that told him this would be more than a simple race. But none of it mattered. He and the Ghost King had trained for this, had become something new together. The pistol fired, and the world exploded into motion. But in that split second before the Ghost King surged forward, Jake heard something that made his blood run cold. The sharp crack of a rifle from a nearby rooftop. Someone was trying to kill the Stallion. Margaret had been right. This race would determine more than just his ranch's fate. It would determine whether the legend of the Ghost King lived or died. The Ghost King burst from the starting line like its namesake lightning, but Jake had already shifted his weight, guiding the Stallion into an evasive pattern. The rifle bullets sparked off the ground where they'd been a heartbeat before. Screams erupted from the crowd as more shots rang out. But the Ghost King wove through the chaos with supernatural grace, Jake clinging to its back through pure instinct and trust. The other horses panicked, some throwing their riders, turning the start into bedlam. It's McKenna's men. Someone shouted, "They're trying to kill the horse." But Jake knew better. These shots were too precise, too professional. Someone wanted the Ghost King dead, rather than captured. Someone who understood that a legend killed was safer than a legend free. Through their merged consciousness, Jake felt the Stallion's rage, not fear, but fury at this cowardly attack. The Ghost King wanted to fight, but Jake guided it forward. "Run," he whispered. "Show them what 70 years of freedom taught you." And run, they did. The Ghost King accelerated beyond anything Jake had experienced in their training, its hooves barely touching the earth. They flew past the other horses as if they were standing still, leaving a trail of dust and amazement. The race route led through the town's main street, then out into the desert for a loop before returning. As they thundered past storefronts and saloons, people poured out to watch. Some threw their hats in the air, others fell to their knees, as if witnessing something holy. But the danger wasn't over. As they reached the desert portion, riders emerged from hidden positions, McKenna's men, trying to corral them. Jake saw the trap. They wanted to force the Ghost King into a box canyon just off the race route, where nets and more men waited. But the Stallion had already sensed it, changing direction without Jake's guidance. They went up instead of around, the Ghost King climbing a steep hill that no ordinary horse would attempt at full gallop. Jake held on, trusting completely, as they crested the rise and launched into space. For a moment, they flew, horse and riders suspended between earth and sky. The morning sun, turning them into a silhouette, burned into the watching crowd's memory. Forever. They landed hard, but the Ghost King never missed a stride. Plunging down the far slope, while McKenna's men cursed and tried to follow on horses already exhausted from the chase. Jake laughed, wild and free, finally understanding what White Eagle must have felt all those years ago. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about being truly, completely alive. They rejoined the race route to find they'd opened an impossible lead. The other racers were specks in the distance, but Jake didn't slow down. The Ghost King had more to prove, more to show. They flew across the desert, two spirits joined in a harmony that transcended species. Jake felt the Stallion's memories flowing through him, decades of sunrise runs, of storms weathered, of falls protected, of freedom defended. He understood now why White Eagle had made the horse immortal. It wasn't just about saving one animal. It was about preserving the wild spirit that civilization sought to destroy. As they approached the final turn back toward town, Jake saw more trouble ahead. A line of armed men blocked the path. Not McKenna's thugs, but well-dressed gentlemen, with expensive rifles. At their head stood Harrison Colt himself. "That's far enough, Thornton," he called. "That horse is too dangerous to exist. It gives people ideas, makes them think they can fight progress. We're ending this now." But before Colt could give the order to fire, thunder filled the air. Not from the sky, but from the earth itself. The Ghost King's herd, 40 strong, came charging across the desert, led by the lead mare. They'd followed their king all the way from Devil's Canyon. The sight of the wild herd, bearing down on them, broke the gunmen's nerve. They scattered, diving for cover as the Mustangs swept past, like a living avalanche. The Ghost King trumpeted in triumph, and Jake felt tears streaming down his face. They weren't alone. They'd never been alone. The herd formed a protective circle around their king as they entered the final stretch, running together as they had for decades in the wild. The crowd went insane, cheering and weeping at the sight. Even Judge Morrison threw his hat in the air, caught up in the moment. As they crossed the finish line, Jake knew they hadn't just won a race. They'd won something far more precious, the right to remain free. But the Ghost King wasn't done. The stallion reared up, pawing the air, screaming its challenge to anyone who would try to cage the wild spirit it represented. In that moment, everyone watching understood. Some things couldn't be owned. Some spirits couldn't be broken. And some partnerships transcended every rule humans tried to impose. The legend of the Ghost King would live on, not as a story of a horse that couldn't be tamed, but as proof that true partnership required no dominance, only understanding, respect, and love. In the aftermath of the race, Tucson erupted in chaos and celebration. Jake found himself surrounded by a mob of admirers, reporters, and would-be buyers, all clamoring for attention. But the Ghost King stood calm in the center of the storm, ears swiveling to track potential threats while maintaining an almost regal composure. Margaret Preston pushed through the crowd, accompanied by territorial marshals she'd apparently had waiting. Mr. McKenna and Mr. Colt are being arrested for attempted destruction of property and disrupting a legal sporting event, she announced with satisfaction. Their days of terrorizing wild horses are over. Judge Morrison approached with the prize money, $5,000, in a leather satchel that felt heavier than its weight in gold. Son, he said, shaking his head in wonder. I've been judging races for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what I saw today. That wasn't just writing, that was poetry in motion. He paused, then added quietly, my grandfather used to tell stories about the old days, when the Comanche rode without saddles and seemed to become one with their horses. I never believed him until today. You've shown us something we've forgotten, something we need to remember. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Jake found himself alone with the Ghost King and Margaret. The herd waited patiently at the town's edge, ready to return to their canyon home. So what now? Margaret asked. You've got your prize money. You can save your ranch. But what about? She gestured to the Ghost King. Jake had already made his decision. The ranch can wait one more day. First we go home. All of us. He looked at the stallion. Your real home. And we make sure it stays protected forever. The Ghost King nicked softly, and Jake could have sworn it was smiling. The journey back to Devil's Canyon took 2 days. The entire herd moving together across the desert, like a river of living history. Jake rode, the Ghost King, part of the way, then walked beside it. Sometimes just sat and watched, as the horses grazed under star-filled skies. Margaret accompanied them, sharing stories of her grandfather that filled in gaps in Jake's understanding. White Eagle had been more than just a horseman, he'd been a bridge between worlds. Someone who understood that the future didn't have to destroy the past. On their last night before reaching the canyon, Margaret revealed her final secret. The immortality isn't permanent, she said quietly. My grandfather built in a way to end it, when the time was right. When the Ghost King finds a true partner, someone who embodies the old ways in the new world, the binding can be transferred. The horse can finally rest, passing its spirit to its descendants, ensuring the herd's protection for generations. She pulled out the leather pouch she'd mentioned before. Inside was another carved stone, this one showing a horse and rider merged into a single form. The choice is yours and the Ghost King's. Continue as you are, or complete the ceremony and let the stallion finally know peace. Jake held the stone, feeling its weight. He looked at the Ghost King, standing proud against the sunset. What do you want, old friend? The stallion walked over and nuzzled the stone, then looked toward its herd. The answer was clear. It was tired of being alone, tired of watching loved ones age and die while it remained unchanged. It wanted to live a natural life, whatever time remained, and pass its legacy to the next generation. Jake nodded, understanding. Then that's what we'll do. The ceremony was simple, performed at the same spring where Jake had first tried to capture the Ghost King. As the sun rose, Jake placed both carved stones together and spoke words Margaret taught him, words in Shoshone that White Eagle had passed down. The Ghost King stood still as light seemed to flow from the stones, surrounding both horse and man in a gentle glow. Jake felt something fundamental shift, a connection that went beyond the physical. The immortality passed from the Ghost King into the land itself, into the herd, into the promise that this place would remain wild and free. When it was done, the Ghost King looked somehow lighter, younger despite its years. It pranced like a colt, then galloped to join its herd with a joy Jake had never seen before. It would live out its natural days now, however many remained, no longer bearing the burden of immortality. but the protection would remain, woven into the very stones of Devil's Canyon. Margaret smiled through her tears. My grandfather would be so proud. You've completed what he began, bridging the old world and the new. She handed Jake the deed to the canyon lands. This belongs to you now, or rather, to them. Guard it well. Jake used part of the prize money to save his ranch, but he spent most of his time in Devil's Canyon, learning from the herd, protecting them from those who would do harm. He married Margaret 2 years later, and together they established the White Eagle Sanctuary, a place where wild horses could live as they were meant to, free, proud, and partnered with humans who understood that true strength came not from dominance, but from respect. The Ghost King lived another 10 years, serving many foals who carried its spirit forward. When it finally passed, Jake was there, holding its great head as it drew its last breath. They buried it at the spring where their partnership began, marking the spot with the 2 carved stones that had brought them together. Years later, when Jake was old and gray, he would still ride out to that spring, sometimes, especially at dawn. He swore he could see the Ghost King running with its descendants, forever young in spirit, if not in body. The legend lived on, not as a tale of a horse that couldn't be tamed, but as proof that the greatest partnerships were built on freedom, trust, and love. And in Devil's Canyon, protected for all time, the wild horses ran free, carrying in their blood the legacy of White Eagle, the Ghost King, and a cowboy who learned that sometimes, to truly possess something, you had to be willing to let it go. The old ways and the new had found their balance, and in that balance, something magical endured, the unbreakable bond between human and horse, preserved forever in a place where legends never died.